Welcome to NAFI's More Right Rudder podcast. I'm Beth Stanton, Director of Publications and Editor for NAFI. This is The Writers Behind the Stories, a bi-monthly series where we get to meet some of the authors who write the articles in NAFI's Mentor magazine. Mentor is a magazine by flight instructors for flight instructors and features an array of topics dedicated to improving the skills of aviation instructors. Today on the show, we have Patrick Howell. Patrick is a graduate of the Citadel Military College with a bachelor's degree in English and Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University with a master's degree in aeronautics. He is a CFI, CFII, MEI, and a Cirrus Standardized Instructor pilot. He is also an FAA Safety Team Representative, volunteer for Pilot and Pause, and is an Associate NAFI Master Flight Instructor. Patrick is a Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Air Force with a 15-year active duty career. He served for 7 years as an instructor and check airman in the B-52 bomber. He is wrapping up his time on active duty and is leaping into the civilian sector. Patrick lives in Omaha, Nebraska, and is a charter pilot at Silverhawk Aviation and instructor at Revv Aviation. Patrick has written several feature articles for Mentor magazine and is the author of On Your Wing, the Meet a NAFI member column that debuted in the July-August 2023 issue of Mentor. He describes himself as a high-energy flight instructor invested in growing smart, safe, and proficient pilots. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, my first question to you is, how are you a friggin' lieutenant colonel? Like, is that normal for somebody? Like, I always think of colonels as older guys and gals. So are you just like a freakishly talented person that you like went up the ranks so fast?
No, it happened on time. About the window to make lieutenant colonels about the 15-year mark. But I remember being a brand new lieutenant and seeing, you promote from major to lieutenant colonel, and I remember seeing majors that I walked into my squadron and thought, "Holy crap, those guys are ancient." And now I'm probably 4 or 5 years past that, so it snuck up on me real fast. I think not so much from any particular talent, just the fact that I stuck around. So
You're so modest. So it was just the passage of time.
yeah, being marginally good at your job helps, but you keep your nose clean and you do the things you're supposed to do, and you check the boxes and do the jobs and have the experience, and sometimes it works out for you. So.
Well, I'm very impressed with this. I'm also, one of the other things I want to talk about is English major aeronautical.
Yeah.
So I met you in person last Oshkosh, so 2022 Oshkosh. At that point, you had already written one article for Mentor magazine, which we're going to talk about. But you came up to me and said, I have a degree in English, and I'm also like in the B-52 bomber. And I'm like, hang on a second, how does that all jive? So tell us a little bit about like how you transitioned from why did you start with English and then you went on to get your master's degree in aeronautics?
Yeah. So the the English major was kind of at the time it was kind of a sad story. So I'm sure like a lot of people that probably listen to the podcast and read Mentor, I've wanted to fly since I can't remember. My first thoughts as a kid were I want to fly. So um, knowing nothing about general aviation or having known in my family that was into general aviation, I thought, well, I'll join the Air Force and fly. So that was you know, my goal that I was working toward since again, I was 5 years old and my kindergarten teacher was, Patrick, what do you be when you grow up? I'm like, I want to fly for the Air Force. Um, the Air Force a lot of time prioritizes technical degrees. So um, I was in high school and I wanted to, go to college. So I applied for the scholarship for an ROTC scholarship. And you generally have a better chance of getting the scholarship if you apply as a technical major. They don't just give you a scholarship and say, pick your major. They say, are you going to be tech or non-tech? So I picked physics because I took physics in high school and I liked it. We are doing all kinds of, cool experiments like, hey, hit your teacher with an egg from the top of the football stadium. And I'm like, this is cool. I want to be in physics. So I applied to be a physics major. Got accepted to the Citadel and showed up and forgot one important thing that math and I do not agree. So my first semester was passable. My second semester, my freshman year, was deplorable GPA wise. And the Air Force said, remember that scholarship we gave you? Sorry. Um, so that was a bit of a wake up call. But it ended up being a blessing in disguise because I took a English comp as every other undergrad does the freshman year, and I took an English class, and I was like, I kind of like this. So once the constraint of having to be a technical major was removed by losing the scholarship, it ended up being kind of a blessing in disguise because I got into a major which I actually really liked, and I knew I was going to get commissioned. I knew I was going to go in the Air Force. So at that point, the major didn't really matter; it was just getting the degree. So I've always been a reader. I've been an avid reader since you can probably see the bookcase behind me. Since I was in middle school, and what's a better degree for a reader than English? Read books and write papers about it. So that's how that happened. And then the B-52 happened because I had I was getting commissioned, and they said, "Hey, who wants to fly?" And I said, "Duh." So they go, "Hey, put in for a pilot, navigator, whatever." So I got picked up for navigator training, and went off to San Antonio, Texas, and then did well enough in my navigator training where I more or less had my choice of what I was going to fly. And as I was thinking about what I was going to say for the interview earlier, I was a sophomore in high school when 9/11 happened. And I think that kind of, I was already going to serve, and now I'm really going to serve, right? That's just probably every red-blooded American, teenager's like, I'm in. So, I wanted to be, there was a war on, and I wanted to be a part of it. Young, dumb, and like full of gung ho. So get to navigator training, and the biggest, baddest airplane you can fly is the B-52. So that's what got me there. So that's how I became an English major flying a 8-engine, 488,000-pound strategic bomber.
Well, I just had to ask you, and thank you for explaining it so beautifully, because it is kind of a head scratcher, and I, as many people know, was an English major, and I majored in English because it involved the least amount of math. And then I became a pilot, and in the course of becoming a pilot, I realized, oh, becoming a pilot is all the stuff I didn't think I could do, and then it's like, oh, well, I actually can do this, and I'm good at it. And so I guess life can really bring us into some really improbable places. And I'm sorry, but the B-52 is quite the badass aircraft. And I'm sorry, like everybody, like I think that alone is like just, I mean, I know you're married, but that would be a really good way to pick up chicks, like a B-52. Because I mean, it's such an iconic, cool airplane. So, okay, on that, tell us, now you wrote about in your second article, Why I Teach Flying, you spoke about one of your experiences you had instructing someone in the B-52. And that was in the March-April 2023 issue of Mentor magazine. So people can go read that article. But can you tell us what is one of your favorite things? What was one of your favorite things instructing in the B-52? Because, listen, come on, this is not a Cessna.
Yeah. So the way just like any other professional aviation organization works, right? There's upgrade pathways. So in the B-52, you start out traditionally as a navigator. So you're like the co-pilot, quote unquote, right? As far as you're in the, just like upstairs, there's, right seat, left seat dichotomy. Downstairs is right seat, left seat dichotomy. So the navigator traditionally sits in the right seat downstairs, and then you stick around about a year and a half. You upgrade what we traditionally call the radar navigator, which is basically the bombardier position. sometimes I date myself with this reference, but I tell people if you've seen Dr. Strangelove and James Earl Jones in that movie, I'm James Earl Jones. So how cool is that, right? Like I'm basically Darth Vader. Um, yeah. But anyway, so you do that and then you upgrade to instructor. But usually you're in an operational unit, so you're instructing people that are already qualified, but you may be doing things like recurrent training or upgrade training. Um, so then we lovingly call it the schoolhouse. So it's what's really known as the formal training unit. So it's where everyone comes to get their initial B-52 training. So I said, there's kind of a few different paths you can go down in your career, and I said I want to go be a schoolhouse instructor because I thought that was just about cool. So to kind of get back to the question, that was kind of the neatest thing as an instructor, was taking these newly winged aviators straight out of their navigator training, or even because we always say you're not just instructor navigator or an instructor pilot, you're a B-52 instructor. So it's not just I know my own job. I know about the weapon system or the plane, and I know enough about the other crew positions to help inform them from my crew position how to do their job better. So you're taking these, young 22, 24-year-old Americans that are, brand new, freshly winged Air Force aviators, but you're teaching them about this incredibly complex weapon system. And the B-52 is it's a 50s era design, right? So it's not, human factors wasn't a thing. It's not ergonomic. It's insanely hot in the summer, and it's not that warm in the winter. It's noisy, it's shaky. The pressurization is 1950, so it can be kind of fatiguing to fly the thing. But it's really rewarding to take these people, and in the course of a 7 or 8 month course, they can't hardly turn the thing on to they can be a functioning part of the community and employ, and we call it fly, fight, and defend the jet. So that was cool. And then you kind of develop a bond because it's a family, really it is. We call it the buff, big ugly fat fellow. But you're not only teaching the people how to operate the system, you bring them into your buff family. So a lot of the youngins I trained, I ended up deploying with later. So I got to see them basically from the word go in the B-52 all the way to taking this plane to an actual deployment, and using the plane like it was designed to do. So, and that was Josh that I wrote the article about, and a lot of others that were just like him. And that was incredibly fulfilling to take, I call them my kids, even though they're probably, 4 years younger, take my FU kids, and they're from, in the door day one all the way to real world operations. So,
well, that just sounds like you said in your article that you wrote, such a rewarding job to pass along that knowledge. And actually, in the September-October issue of Mentor magazine, there's a theme in that article, and I wrote an editor's piece called "Passing the Generational Torch," and it's about, as flight instructors, we are passing our knowledge onto the next generation, which, I said flight instructors create the next generation of pilots, which sounds like an idiotically obvious thing, but it's not just teaching skills. It's you're passing forward a legacy that stretches back, more than 100 years. So it's must be quite an honor to be able to do this, and it must just be like, wow, this is my job. I get to do this.
mm-hmm. Yeah, it was. And again, you talk about an airplane that was, all our jets were manufactured in 1960 or 61. So, I always get the trivia question wrong. The Wright brothers' first flight was 1901. So you're talking about an airplane that spanned, literally half the history of manned flight. So that's pretty cool. You walk out of this thing, and sometimes you're kind of like, I get to go fly this thing today.
I look at the first time I saw one, I'm like, how does it fly? Like, how how does the behemoth fly? So I just think that's such a cool part of your story, Patrick, because there's not a lot of flight instructors that have had that experience. Like you said, you got to pick and choose, and that was cool that you got to choose that. I wanted to talk about the couple of things. One was so let me ask you a question. How long have you been a NAFI member, Patrick?
Since the day I passed my CFI check ride,
Which was
August 12th, 2017.
excellent. So,
I literally, I remember the DPE asked me the question about how you're going to make sure you're doing your professional level ones to CFI. And my answer literally was, well, I'm going to go home and assuming this check ride goes well, I'm going to join NAFI. So,
and what did you think NAFI could offer you?
uh, I think exactly what I'm getting. You know, professional development, growth, um, new ways to think about things. I learning from the experience of others. Um, I always say that you're never going to live long enough to learn, everything you need to know by yourself. So learn from others. So, um, and I think that's why things like this and mentor and all the online content are great because you're getting all this experience.
Well, this was the perfect segue. I swear we didn't set this up ahead of time, you guys, but perfect segue. So Patrick's first article that he wrote for Mentor magazine, which, as I said, appeared in the February 2022 issue. Patrick tells a story about how he got a little sideways in a flight because he got a little dehydrated heat stroke situation. And I thought to myself, I love these types of stories. They're almost like I did this, don't you do this story. It's almost like a confessional story. And it's these types of stories I love because they're vulnerable. You put yourself out there on record saying, I did this and it probably wasn't the best idea. This is what led up to me making these decisions. And I won't do that in the future. And maybe you've done this and you shouldn't too. So I really love these types of story, Patrick. So tell us a little bit about the situation and then why did you decide to actually write about this? Because this was your first article for Mentor, I believe.
So I think something I've brought from being an Air Force instructor is we have these things. Every flight that we fly in the B-52, we write this thing called a debrief focal point. And it usually starts with something like, why did this happen? Why did this go this way? Or, why did this not go according to plan? And usually there's contributing factors. So we'll say, well, this happened and this happened and this happened. And then usually there is a root cause, and we'll say, and the root cause of this going sideways was this. And there's always an instructional fix. So we've got contributing factors, root cause, instructional fix. And I guess in a way, I kind of framed that article almost like I'd write a DFP. I said, well, hey, this could have gone, really bad. It ended up not, but I thought the lesson was important to put out there. And the other thing with the Air Force debrief is, it's always crucial to set your ego aside, to take your own pride out of the equation and go, hey, look, like this is objectively what happened and what I did wrong and what I could have done to fix it. So when I wrote that article, there was an aspect of, oh man, I really could have porked this up. But it was kind of like, you know what, I'm gonna set my ego aside. I'm gonna write this article and go from there, so other people can learn because I can see that happening with a lot of people, and I would almost bet that's probably happening more than we think, but maybe not being acknowledged. So
you want to just explain in a just very brief, so people are like, "What happened?" So just
yeah.
very brief to explain the situation.
I'm in Minot, North Dakota, right? So North Dakota is not usually known to be a very hot and humid place. That was my second lesson of the day. So it's not like I've done like 5-6 lessons in a row. Second lesson, it was 80 degrees. I jumped out of a Warrior right into a 150. Maybe I think tossed back the Coke and the Snickers and hop right back in. And we're on the downwind for I think like our third pattern. And all of a sudden I'm like, something ain't right. I'm not, I'm not up to snuff. Like this isn't working. Um, just feeling, substandard. And I look at my student and I go, hey, we need to put this thing down. Like we're done. Luckily, we're already in the pattern, already in the downwind, and I can't remember, he was either like right pre-solo or I think maybe even post-solo and working on short and soft landings. But I remember rolling down the taxiway and I'm like, I'm on the verge of like opening the window and barfing here just from feeling so poorly. And we get inside and I couldn't hardly concentrate on filling out the logbook. And I basically said, good job today. Here you go. See you next time. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, what's going on? And I kind of go into that same kind of, critical self-assessment mode. I'm like, well, I had a cup of coffee this morning and I think I had a Coke after the flight. Um, didn't really drink anything, jumped right from one flight to another and kind of set myself up to get dehydrated and have, heat exhaustion. So,
Well, I'm so glad that, I mean, like I said, when I think there's an element of, especially with pilots, they want to appear like invincible and I know what I'm doing and I'm super pilot. And I really commend you and people and other people who are like, hey, this is what I did. And, I could have done something differently, because to your point, you are not the only person who has done this or is doing it as we're talking right now.
yeah.
So I think shining a light on these situations is so important. And I love the fact that it was your military process that sort of made you think this through and want you to write this article. So another good segue, Patrick, thank you for like handing these to me. I'm interested in now you're a flight instructor, you're segueing from the military to the civilian sector. Do you notice any differences? Because I mean, a lot of our NAFI members, I mean, most are flight instructors, but I would imagine most of them aren't military flight instructors. So tell me a little bit about, do you see a difference in the type of training either the instructors received to become instructors, and also how how you as a military instructor teach your students?
Um, I think as far as how I teach, we always said that any Air Force training is like trying to teach somebody to hit a hole in one in golf and you get 10 swings. And some people can do it in 8. Some people, if you gave them 13, maybe they'll do it in 13. But, the way Air Force and really all military flight training works is you didn't get it in 10, sorry. You're out, next person. So that was something that I kind of realized pretty early on was, not there's not always one, it doesn't have to be one way. It can, you can train somebody different ways, different takes. Some people learn at their own pace, and that's okay. Um, the other thing I think, kind of maybe two sides of the same coin. In the Air Force, every flight is like, we got to go, we got to go, we got to go. So I think making the realization that not every flight has to go, is there's value to that, right? But I think on the other thing, we have this kind of sacred term, and it's not an Air Force thing. It's really all you know American aviation flying, and we call it knock it off. So if something bad happens or we're uncomfortable, if you say the phrase, "Hey, knock it off," that's like a trigger, right? And it's everybody goes right, and it's like everything stops right now. There's no more discussion. It's hey, like it's almost like if somebody says go around in the airplane, right? If we say knock it off, like we're done. So I think having the realization that like sometimes it's okay to call knock it off. Like we don't have to log this this flight. We don't have to go flying because it's okay. Like I'm not constrained by these parameters. I have to get the 10 swings. It's like what, we're gonna come back another day. We need to do some ground anyway. We got to talk about weight and balance of airspace, and that's fine. Um, I do think one of the valuable things is having experience in lots of different places. The place I teach right now, we're associated with University of Nebraska Omaha, and they've got a 141 program. And a lot of our instructors are really sharp, and they're super motivated. And but this goes for a lot of the different places. Is that you kind of grow up, you kind of do what you know, like when you grew up. So in flight training right now, it's a lot of like, well, this is how we've always done it because this is how my instructor taught me to do it. But he's 6 months ahead of me at UNO, so there's just kind of, well, that's how we do it. Well, then you ask him, well, why? Well, that's how I was taught. Okay, but why? Well, that's how my instructor taught me. Okay, who taught your instructor? Well, another guy from X university. Well, who taught him? So, and maybe this isn't a strictly speaking military thing. This could be a corporate pilot, an airline pilot. But I think there's value in having people that are outside, just the flight training environment to be able to kind of come in and go, hey, think about doing it this way. Because when I was in the Air Force, when I was at, X airline, we did it this way and it worked. So did that answer the question?
Yes. And it's just another example of passing along that generational torch. And it can come from a different family. You know what I mean? It just so again, we're talking about like family lineage, like we always did it this way. I don't want to say it has a sense of inbreeding about it, but it kind of does a little bit. So how about you bring in some fresh DNA from another perspective? Mm-hmm. How do you like that analogy? See,
there you go.
This is what makes us such great writers, right?
I'm just a crazy cousin is what I am.
Bring the crazy cousin in. He's gonna mix it up.
Right.
Well, another thing, Patrick, is so another article that you wrote was about using simulators in flight training, and that was called Simulator Convert, and that was in the December 2022 issue. And in this article, you talk about the value of using simulators. You talked mainly about for instrument training, but also in primary training. So with that part of it, so you are a younger pilot and you are a younger CFI. I know you think you're an old man now, but you do have a 3 in the front of your age, I believe. So
yeah. At least another few years.
So tell me a little bit about, now obviously we all have our unique perspective on things, and you come at it from a military perspective. You also come at it from a younger person's perspective, and from a technology standpoint, you're a digital native, right? You grew up with all of this stuff as opposed to pilots who are maybe in their 50s, 60s, 70s. So tell me a little bit about how does that inform, do you feel that that informs your instruction, your openness to using technology, your familiarity or comfort with technology? This is a big question. And then also, when you teach students of differing ages, how does that interface?
So I think part of it's just the trend that aviation is going down. Everything is going digital. Like we're not training. At least I'm not. I'm sure there's some people out there that may be, but I think by and large, everybody's training with ForeFlight or some kind of an EFB. So I think I'm comfortable with it, but I think it's kind of up to me to keep everybody up with the trend. It's like if someone wants to do it the old school way and paper approach plates and paper en route charts, like that's fine, it works. But I think it can help people to go, hey, here's an easier, more efficient way to do this. I think as far as the simulator, there are so many things I can do to a student in a simulator to help them be better. Not just to check off a training box, right? Like I'm not just, for instrument training, I'm not just going to go make them do an ILS in the simulator just because it's a simulator and it's cool. I can do things like, hey, let me fail their static system and see if they catch that. Or one of my guys who just passed his commercial check, but he's the one in the picture with me in that article when he was doing his instrument rating. I was being a little old school and I made him do an NDB approach, but I failed his attitude driver, and Um, he was in the middle of his procedure turn in the simulator on an NDB approach in the weather, and I failed his attitude gyro, and he knew something wasn't up. And he looks at me and goes, "What did you do?" And I just kind of went, and I don't think he got out of that before the simulator went, big red screen. But we talk about in flight training or in CFI training about law of intensity and law of primacy and all those learning laws. It's like that was a much more intense experience by him seeing something but not realizing it, rather than just me taking two plastic covers and covering your stuff and go, here's your partial panel. But that led to a much more effective training session, I think. So I think as far as your point on the age thing, it's a great time to get into aviation. There's a lot of people coming to aviation, a lot of young people coming to aviation, and even more than me, they're going to be iPhone digital natives. So they may not want to do things with paper chart, and I think that's fine. So it's kind of up to me to evolve to meet their wants, their needs, and to fit them how they learn best. If you pull out a paper sectional and they're like, yeah, it's paper. Like, okay, we can use an iPad. That's fine. So,
well, it's funny. So I trained to get my pilot's license in 2010, and my instructor didn't even let me use the GPS, the very rudimentary GPS on the aircraft, until it was like almost ready for my check ride. He wanted me to do everything with the E6B flight calculator and charting with pencil and paper and the all that kind of stuff. So now, whatever, 13 years later, see, math majored. Not, everything's, just stick your iPad on your kneeboard and go off. So it's just different now, and that's okay. So is there not that trend where it's like you need to be able to do it on paper and pencil? Like, is that, or is flight instruction getting away from that?
I guess the way I do it is I kind of do a hybrid method. I still will teach the first cross country with a paper sectional and a paper nav log and an E6B and a plotter. But the reason I'm really doing it is not so much because I think that's what they have to use, because once they get their license, they can use it if they want. I think it's a lot easier to show the fundamentals. It's like, hey, here's why the wind correction is the way it is, or here's why the ground speed's the way it is. And it's not just, if they put a number into the iPad and it gives them something goofy, they've got the context to go, that doesn't look right. Let me dig more into this, rather than just, if they've never seen, using a whiz wheel or using a plotter. I personally feel like there's a bit of a trap there. They'll just trust whatever the iPad tells them. If you at least teach them a little bit old school, they can go, I don't like that. Let me dig. Or why is this like this? Oh, there's a really heavy crosswind at altitude, or something like that. So I don't know. I honestly think of myself as a little old school for doing it that way. But I think there's value in both.
What is the norm? Do most flight instructors do that? Again, I know, you don't know every flight instructor instructing, but is there a general consensus amongst flight instructors as we should still teach it this way, just to kind of give people a baseline? Or do you see people going all old school or all 100% digital?
I think it's a generational thing. I really do. I think it's how you were brought up, what your instructor taught you, and maybe, your age, the instructor, and your student's age. So, I'm sure there are lots of instructors out there that are probably a lot like yours were, that were completely old school. And, you can have an iPad when you're done with your check ride. And I think that's fine. That's one of the great things about aviation. It's like I kind of said in the opening. There's no one right way. There's multiple ways to get the same outcome. And if you want to be an iPad native and do it that way, that's fine. You want to do paper sectional and, complete hand plotting, knock yourself out, and it works.
I heard something a while ago, and I'm going to tell this story because I'm sure my partner's brother will not be listening to this podcast, but he's of millennial age, and dude cannot read a map. Like he like his whole life He just had this to get him places, GPS, like the skill, and I've read some research that like the people of a certain generation like literally don't know how to read maps. And I would think that if you were training to be a pilot and you had only known about GPS to get around, that could be a liability.
Yeah, I would think so. But again, I think it's how you teach it. You can use the iPad. We're still going to look out the window. We're still going to look at the stopwatch and go, well, I see, whether I'm reading off a paper sectional or my iPad, I should still see like, this town or this highway or this lake at this time. And that still works.
And I will say, thinking about it, when you're in the air, you have a very different perspective than when you're on the ground in a car on a surface street. So that is right, because you have more of a perspective of, because you're like looking down at the whole earth. Like you said, mountains over there, ocean over here. Okay, I'm going north, I'm going south. So that's a good point. So Patrick, tell us, there's some really, this is a really exciting time for you. I mean, you're entirely shifting gears, 15 years in the military, and now there's this whole new world of civilian aviation that you are going for. And I understand there is some King Air training for you. So tell us a little bit about like what's next for Patrick.
So everybody maybe asking the question, was in the Air Force, why does he have a beard? I'm in this DoD program where if you're going to get off active duty, you can intern with a company for 4 to 6 months. So I applied and got accepted, and that's what I'm doing the King Air training with. So I'll be flying with Silverhawk Aviation in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's a Part 135 operator. I finished ATP CTP last week, and I'm going to King Air simulator training with flight safety next week. And if I don't stooge that up, I'll be flying King Air 90s here by the end of September. So.
Well, after the B-52, how hard could it be, Patrick?
We'll see. We'll see.
So in the September-October issue of Mentor, there's an article by a NAFI member named Joe Stoller. It's actually a reprint of an article of when he was getting his multi-engine rating. And Joel just retired from the airlines, and the retirement age for the airlines is 65, but you can still fly commercially for other, not the major airlines. So he went and learned how to fly a King Air. And what they told him when he started, now this guy has 25,000 hours and lots of different aircraft. They told him, this is one of the hardest type ratings you'll ever get. And he did it, and he said they were right.
Yeah.
What is it about the King Air that's such a challenge?
I don't know. My
you'll find out,
chief,
I suppose. But
I'll find out. Yeah, my assistant chief told me the same thing the other day. I imagine for one thing, there's a lot going on. I think the simulator, the avionics are stock. So there's an aspect of dealing with stock avionics, not some of the newer fancier stuff. And I think the multitasking is what will get people what I'm told. So.
Now, is it different than just a different multi-engine aircraft?
There's more to it, probably. More powerful, bigger engines, single pilot the way I'll be doing it. So.
Well, Joel actually did write and submitted an article about what the training was like. Maybe I should forward it to you.
I'll need to read that one. I can study up.
We're going to publish that in an upcoming issue of Mentor magazine, and maybe you'll have to write about your experience.
Yeah.
See how it measures up. So Patrick, thank you for sharing all of your background with us. You really have, it is a unique, like I said, everybody has their own personal unique story, but yours is pretty cool. Share with us why you decided to start writing for Mentor magazine, and also when somebody in NAFI, people were like, oh, we should do a meet a member column, and you were the first person I thought of, and then I pinged you and you immediately were just like, yes, I'll do that, which thank you, I appreciate that very much. So tell us about your eagerness to share the 3 articles that you wrote, and then also to want to take on this column. what was your impulse for wanting to do that?
I guess I want to get my money's worth out of this English degree on my wall over here. Um, no, it's I genuinely love I don't say it, instructing teaching people how to fly. It's why I wrote that article. And it was another way to give back to the community because aviation has given me so much and meant so much that and then being a flight instructor has been so rewarding that it was one more to give back. So that was kind of the impetus. And once I wrote the first one, it was almost like, okay, I'm hooked. I kind of in a way kind of got jazzed about seeing myself get published. So it's like, all right, I want to see that again. And then the column, it just seemed interesting. It was something new and something different, and again, another way to kind of give back to the organization. And when you called and said, "Hey, you want to write this column?" and it wasn't even a half a heartbeat. Yeah.
So what would you tell some of our listeners right now who, they've been NAFI members, they've been flight instructors, everybody has their stories, and then they're like, oh yeah, there's that time blank. But what would you tell them? But they haven't done it. They haven't reached out. They haven't said, here, Beth, here's an article, or would you like me? I want to write. What would you tell people who have an inkling that they might want to do this, but they're pausing on it?
Don't be afraid. Do it. Everyone's got a story. I feel like some people think that, well, that's not really worth it. What do I really know? It's like, no, everybody's got something. Everybody's got a story. Everybody can contribute. And there's value in any of it. So if anybody's holding back, stop, go do it.
And I always tell people that, people might have the idea that they're not a writer, but I just say writing is just a version of storytelling, and we're all storytellers. It's like hanger flying, only in written form, these articles that we talk about. And there is a grand tradition in aviation of the next generation learning from the stories of the generation before them. So that's what I think is so valuable about Mentor Magazine and the authors that contribute to Mentor Magazine. So thank you so much, Patrick. And thank you for taking the time to chat with us. And we are really excited to see what's coming next on the pike for you.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for joining us for the writers behind the series on NAFI's More Right Rudder podcast. Join us next time in 2 months and be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the More Right Rudder podcast.